Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's get started with Week 35's Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, as you found out last week, we're going to be spending the rest of this series' Third Age Thursdays enjoying the food and drink at a long-expected party, which means all sorts of new words to look at on Word Nerd Wednesdays. Now, last week, we looked at the familiar names of Baggins, Bag End, and even the Sackville Baggins. Today, I've got another name in mind. No one had a more attentive audience, we read last week, than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the Gaffer. So today, we're going to do some word nerdery on the Gaffer himself, Master Hamfast Gamgee. Let's start with the big one first, his last name of Gamgee. Now, we'll begin our dive in Tolkien's nomenclature to The Lord of the Rings, as found in Hammond and Skull's Reader's Companion. Now, there we learned that the name Gamgee is found in England, though uncommon. Tolkien explains that while he doesn't know the origin of Gamgee as a name, saying it does not appear to be English, he does point out that, quote, "It is also a word for cotton wool, now obsolescent but known to me in childhood, derived from the name of S. Gamgee, died 1886, a distinguished surgeon who invented Gamgee tissue." Now, Tolkien suggests that translators, and remember that's why he wrote the nomenclature, to help translators know what to do with names of people and places. He suggested that they treat this name as meaningless and retain it with any spelling changes that may seem necessary. In other words, there is no meaning to translate into a different language. Now, that's what made the final copy of the nomenclature, but Hammond and Skull point us to a draft of the entry in which Tolkien says a lot more, acknowledging that Gamgee is a difficult name, but important as that of one of the chief characters. Now, he goes on to cite his preferred rule for translation that a Hobbit name that had no recognizable meaning should be retained, and its sound represented according to the habits of English, or any other language of translation, before suggesting that in this case, maybe replace it with the actual Westron version of the name, Galbasi, or contracted as Galbasi. Then he confuses it a bit further by saying that Gamgee is a borderline case, before giving more history on the name Galbasi, which Tolkien writes was said to be derived from the village name Galabas, which had a meaning, being composed of elements, English play, and one of the words common in place names, such as ham, tun, witch, or stow. In other words, the element in Westron Galab means game or play, and the bas suffix means village, like witch or wick. Hence, Galabas in Westron is translated into English as Gamach, which gets corrupted into Gamagee, then Gamgee. Now, interestingly, Tolkien wasn't always sure this was supposed to be the last name of Sam and his dad. In letter number 72 to Christopher Tolkien, written on the 31st of May, 1944, Tolkien explains, Sam, by the way, is an abbreviation not of Samuel, but of Samwise, the Old English for half-wit, as is his father's name, the Gaffer, Hamwise, for Old English hamfast or stay-at-home. Hobbits of that class have very Saxon names as a rule, and I am not really satisfied with the surname Gamgee, and should change it to Goodchild, if I thought you would let me. Samwise Goodchild. A couple of letters later in number 76, which was written 2 months after the previous one, Tolkien writes back again to Christopher. I wouldn't dream of altering his name without your approval, but the object of the alteration was precisely to bring out the comicness, peasantry, and, if you will, the Englishry of this jewel among the hobbits. Had I thought it out at the beginning, I should have given all the hobbits very English names to match the Shire. The Gaffer came first, and Gamgee followed as an echo of old Lamorna jokes. Now, that needs a quick explanation, thankfully provided by the footnote to that letter. While on holiday with his family at Lamorna Cove in Cornwall in 1932, Tolkien amused the children by giving the nickname Gaffer Gamgee to a local character. Now, that's still not much, but we do get a bit more about it in letter number 257 to Christopher Bretherton in 1964, where he says, It started with a holiday about 30 years ago at Lamorna Cove, then wild and fairly inaccessible. There was a curious local character, an old man who used to go about swapping gossip and weather wisdom and such like. To amuse my boys, I named him Gaffer Gamgee, and the name became part of family lore to fix on old chaps of the kind. At that time, I was beginning on The Hobbit. The choice of Gamgee was primarily directed by alliteration, but I did not invent it. It was caught out of childhood memory as a comic word or name. Now, if we go back to that first letter to Christopher, Tolkien did explain the word nerdery there on the gaffer's first name, Hamfast. It comes from Old English hamfast, stay at home, a fitting name for a hobbit, and especially one of the gaffer's inclinations. In Appendix F to The Lord of the Rings, his name in Westron is Ranugad, which has the same meaning. Now finally, gaffer. No, he's not the electrician on a movie set. A gaffer is simply an old man. The word is actually a contraction of godfather. Now, there is a feminine equivalent, gammer, but interestingly, it has a different construction according to the OED and is a contraction of grandmother. In fact, we even get gammer in The Lord of the Rings in the very last chapter. Now, there were thousands of willing hands of all ages, from the small but nimble ones of the hobbit lads and lasses to the well-worn and horny ones of the gaffers and gammers. Both gaffer and gammer date back to the late 1500s, with gammer being slightly older. And now you know all there is to know about the gaffer, Master Hamfast Stay-at-Home Gamgee, the font of eternal hobbit wisdom, an expert in the growing of vegetables, especially potatoes. But folks, that is it for today's Word Nerd Wednesday. Come back next time as we wander the wide, wild, wonderful world of words weekly on Wednesdays. And if there's a word you want to know more about, please let me know by emailing barnabman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Third Age Thursday. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and please follow or subscribe on your podcast apps. And of course, follow @Tolkien Times on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.